Another video. This time we're looking at population policies. So this is a popular type of question they like to ask in the iGCSE geography course. So we're going to use the example of an antenatal policy in China. So this ran from 1979 and finished in 2015. So the learning objective today, hopefully you will be able to identify firstly what an antenatal policy is and describe this example of the one-child policy in China. So firstly, what is an antenatal policy? Well, these are policies imposed by a government aimed at reducing the fertility rate or birth rate of a country. So they're usually imposed by a government in countries where I suppose the birth rate is exceedingly getting out of hand. So this would put stress on natural resources, for example, resources such as water, food supplies. So the country just simply wants to reduce the amount of children and hence reduce the stress on these resources. So as mentioned, China is our example here. And just to give you an overview of its population structure during different periods in time. So you can clearly see the difference between 1950 and 1995. So 16 years into the policy, you can clearly see all age categories have dramatically increased over this 45-year period. And it's clearly peaked. You can see it's doubled the population in 45 years. And 2010 is towards the end of the policy, so you could clearly see it's had an effect. It's reduced the number of 0 to 4-year-olds, for example, as well as 5 to 19. It was largely successful in that regard, and we're going to look at in what ways was it more successful as well, using more accurate data. So here's just some estimated figures. I suppose the trend is being reversed, so you can clearly see the totals remain fairly stable, and in fact 2050 it's actually the population is actually expected to reduce in 25 years. So currently China, I suppose, is suffering. China's population is starting to actually decrease, where the life expectancy of elderly people is increasing and the birth rate is a lot lower than what the government anticipates. So this obviously leads to a very slow natural increase. But the main focus, of course, today is just looking between that period of 1979 and 2015, the one-child policy. So let's get into that. For all case studies, of course, you need to know at least, I would say, 2 or 3 population data. So here's some must-know data for you. The first one, so during this period, as mentioned, it was successful in the fact that its fertility rate, China's fertility rate, so this is the average number of children a woman has during her reproductive years. So this fell from close to 6 children right down to 1.7. So it was successful in that regard. And this meant that China reduced its overpopulation crisis, and it didn't have to cope with an estimated 400 million extra births. So how did it do this? Well, I've used the acronym IP. Hopefully this will help you structure your answer if you get this in your exam. So the first way it imposed its policies through the use of incentives, usually financial incentives and other social incentives. The P is penalties or punishments. E, exceptions. So there were some exceptions to the rule here. And also enforcement. So how did it, I suppose, monitor and enforce its policy? So starting with incentives, as mentioned, this was mainly financial incentives. So there are some incentives listed on the screen here. First one, free education for those with one child was promoted. Also for those with one child, there were better employment opportunities and they were offered a higher wage as well. Some other financial incentives, there were interest-free loans as well as other social benefits as well. So perhaps they were offered better housing, or original housing was improved as well. So starting the second one, penalties next. So again, this was financial, so there were fines for those with a second child. This was up to around $13,000. Other penalties, if there was a second child, then there were no payment or healthcare benefits provided for them. And there were instances or reports of forced abortions and sterilizations as well. Okay, E, exceptions. So there were some exceptions to the rule. So some families could have a second child, especially if they were disabled or if you had twins, they were exempt. And there were some ethnic minorities, such as the Tibetans as well, and some rural areas of China in which a second child was allowed. Last but not least, enforcement. So the first point here, there were granny police. What we mean by this is elderly people were employed essentially just to spy on the younger population and report them if they were having other children. This happened in major cities such as Beijing. Other ways this policy was enforced, abortion was legalized. The government also used propaganda campaigns, lots of posters, as well as promoting late marriage and increasing access to contraceptives, as well as family planning as well. So there's lots of descriptions and the ways it's enforced, penalties, for instance, that you can really utilize well in your exam. So what types of questions, what's the common, I suppose, standard question they would like to ask in the exam? Well, usually they just ask for a description of the policy. So if you can remember this acronym IP, that will help you structure your answer. So here's what's been asked previously in March 2019 and 2021. So exactly the same wording here. So here's looking at the mark scheme. So a lot of these we have mentioned already, but you can also add to your list as well. So be careful with these types of questions. Development should refer to the policy rather than the reasons or explanations for it. Of course, it's important just to refer to at the start of your answer as to why this policy was introduced, but that shouldn't be the main bulk of your answer here. And here's another mark scheme as well, March 2021, which looks at it in a lot more detail. Okay, so really want to be aiming here level 3. So uses a named example, the name obviously one child policy. So using obviously comprehensive and accurate statements that we've looked at previously. But this must include place-specific reference. So we mentioned Beijing, for example, Tibetans, if we're talking about ethnic minorities. Population data, we've already looked at briefly, but we also will look at some more data. So this will help you achieve, hopefully, 7 out of 7. However, most recently, they may look at the impact. So just be careful. This is a different type of question to this one, which is looking at the way or a description of the policy. This one is looking, I suppose, at the effects, the impacts, the results. This can be positive and negative if you ever see the word impacts, but it's also stated within the question. So quickly looking at the mark scheme for this one. You can clearly see if you only describe the policy, you won't get any marks at all. So just be careful of that. So we will look at this in more detail on the next slide, looking at some of the positive and negative effects. But just you can see here, it has some general points, such as reduced workforce, aging population, an imbalance of sex ratios. So here's lots and lots of impacts you can really utilize in your exam. So we'll just do a little task. We can categorize these into social, economic, and environmental impacts. So the first one, many poorer Chinese families wanted male children. In 2000, 90% of all aborted fetuses in China were female. So this is a social impact. Infanticide, so the killing of children before or after birth, usually of girls. Again, this is reported, not necessarily confirmed, but so just be careful when stating that in the exam. But another social impact. 37 million more men at marriage age currently than women. So again, some nice data you can use to really develop your answer. Another social benefit. Sorry, impact, should I say, not benefit. The population is thought to be made up of little emperor, so we call this little emperor syndrome. So they lack the social skills from not having a brother or sister, for example. So that's social. Oh, I got my animations in the wrong order there. Currently, China's faced with an aging population. So this obviously puts stress on services such as the healthcare, so you could also argue this is economic as well. So this one we've already looked at, 400 million extra births. It's more of an economic impact, but you could also classify it as social or even environmental as well, because it's putting less stress on its supplies of water, food, for instance. So as mentioned, the increasing aging population puts financial stress on the healthcare system, more economic. There's a gender imbalance currently. This by 2020, it's obviously 2024 as we speak, so you can remove the by, but there is a gender imbalance, and this is a social impact. Another impact, should I say, is the 4-2-1 problem. So when they reach that working age, it's likely they will have 2 parents and 4 grandparents. So again, increasing the dependency ratio here. This is an economic impact. This obviously results in a less productive workforce, less skilled and an innovative workforce, because they have to look after either children if they have them, but more likely their grandparents and their parents. Some environmental impact for the next one, puts stress on natural resources. Dependency ratio, social or economic, you could argue as well. Birth rates has reduced, social. Another social factor for the next one. I suppose again this is a positive, the next one here. It has resulted in a new generation of highly educated professionals. And the last but not least, there's it refers again to the gender imbalance, however specifically human trafficking as well. So that's a negative impact and a negative social one at that. So yeah, you can use this grid, a lot of data here really to develop your points, and if you're using this in the right way, there's no reason why you shouldn't get a level 3. Okay, well, thank you for listening, and I hope this has been useful to you.